Hello, I'm Jason Lightoller from Woodside. Today I'm going to show you how to make the shaped part of a crown for a beanie hat using a flatbed knitting machine. So the acceptable way to make a beanie hat is to knit up to a certain point. You would then transfer the stitches to every other needle and then knit a few rows at a tighter tension. You would then sew off those stitches and then you would pull the yarn through the open loops and cinch the top together. There is absolutely nothing wrong with making a hat using that method. I've done that more times than I care to remember, and I have produced some really lovely looking hats by using that method. However, it can have quite a bunched up appearance and it can look really quite bulky. To get a more fitted shape to the crown, we can actually do this in sections of 4. It does take a little bit longer, but the results can be worth it. Now, we're going to be working in quarters, so that includes the amount of stitches you've got and the rows you've got here. This is a mid-gauge machine and I've got 120 stitches in the work position here, and I'm using double knit yarn. So 120 divided by 4 gives me an even number of 30. And that's important. So if your pattern that you're using doesn't actually give you an even number, it gives you a strange number of 27.5 or 33 or 26.2 or something like that, then you might need to tweak the amount of stitches you've got and add an extra 2 or subtract 1 or whatever it is you've got. You need to readjust them so you get an equal number that is divisible by 4. It's not going to make much difference to the total width of your hat, unless of course you have to add for some reason an extra 8 stitches, then there might be a problem somewhere there. But normally you would only need to adjust by about 2, 3 at the very most. So ordinarily a beanie hat that I make by using the every other needle method has a total number of rows of 80. So in this case, I'm going to work the shaping in the last quarter of the hat, and obviously the last quarter would be at the row count here of 60. So that's all you need to know. So you just keep the last row count at 60 and then we're going to work on the first quarter. So I have isolated my first quarter, which in my case, as I said, is 30 stitches. The rest of the needle bed is in hold and my carriage is set to hold. What I'm going to do is decrease 1 stitch each end and make 2 passes of the carriage. Now I'm going to be using the fully fashioned decrease method. You could, if you wanted to, just do the simple decrease by moving that stitch there and then that stitch there. It produces, using that method produces a bit of a rougher edge and it's not a very nice flattering finish. The fully fashioned decrease is the better way of doing it in my opinion. But of course the choice is entirely down to you. You just go 1 stitch in and move it in like that. Make sure that you put your stitch out of work. And the most vital thing is to put a weight at the edge. I can't stress that enough because I have had many of these hats literally fall off the knitting machine as I've gone merrily along, and it's all come off the needles because I didn't weight the edges of the section here. And then we just do another decrease at that end, move the stitches across, making sure that all of the stitches are on the needles, put that out of work and make 2 passes with the carriage. And we do that again. Now if you don't know how to do a fully fashioned decrease, I believe that there are videos showing you how to do this by June Clark and Sally Butcher. They are both fantastic tutors that show you these methods, and I really do urge you to look at their videos because the methods that they show you really are good. So again, that's 2 passes. And you keep going along like this all the way until you get to the very last 2 stitches. So the one thing I didn't mention there is that it's important not to rush this. Just take your time. There's no need to have a race here. And it's really important not to forget to move your weights up as you go along. And if you happen to have lost track of yourself and you can't remember if you've moved this end in or have you moved both ends or one end, then just pull the 3rd needle out here. And then as you can see, I'll just zoom in. As you can see here, there are 2 stitches on this particular needle there. I'll just separate them out, and there would be one on each of those ends there. And it's the same with this needle there, of course. There are 2 stitches on that needle and one there because I've moved them in. I'm just going to zoom back out and then carry on. And when we get to the very end, I'll come back on camera and I will show you what the next steps are. Now, you don't have to use the 3-pronged transfer tool to do a fully fashioned decrease. You can use the 2-pronged transfer tool if you want to. The choice is obviously down to you. There is a way to do this using short rows. However, that method really does produce, in my opinion, it produces quite a coarse edge, and when it comes to joining the edges together, the seam that it produces is quite bulky, and I found that no matter how much steaming you can give to it, it doesn't actually give a very nice flattering finish at all. But it might be what you prefer. Doing a shaped crown using this method is, in my opinion, the best way. So we're down to the last 4 stitches now, and we can't make a 3-pronged transfer tool fully fashioned decrease. So what we're going to do is just move 1 stitch in to the center, and we're going to do that both sides and take the needles out of work. And before we do the second pass, we're going to go back and move the tension up to the tightest and then do the final pass back. We'll take the weight out and we'll just cut this yarn here, because what we're going to do now is just do a quick latch tool bind off of these 2 final stitches. And you need the 2 stitches there because they will form part of the seam allowance. So we'll take these off and bring them through. So that's the first section done. We're now going to move over to the second quarter. So I've isolated the second quarter of 30 stitches. The rest of the needle bed remains in hold. The carriage remains in hold, and we just repeat the process. So what I'm going to do is move the first decrease across, and again we remain doing the fully fashioned 3-pronged transfer tool decrease at each end, and I'm going to rethread the carriage and make 2 passes. I forgot to put my weights on there. I'm hoping that all my stitches did actually knit. Yes, they did, by a very good stroke of luck, more than anything else, I think. And I'll get them on without further delay. I'm just going to double check that, yes, they did. So let's just get those on there, and then I'll continue with this quarter just as we did with the first section. So again, we're down to the last 4 stitches, and it's just a single stitch in from the edge there on both sides, and 2 passes of the carriage, just as we did before, and we bind off. So once again, I've isolated the next quarter. So this is the third quarter of 30 stitches. I'm going to do exactly the same thing as I did for the first 2 quarters. There is absolutely nothing different. So I'm going to do the same thing for the third and the last quarter, and then I'll come back on camera and show you the next steps. So here are the 4 quarters that we worked off with the decreases. And the first things first is to join the side seam. So what you're going to do is bring the 2 long side seams together, right sides together, and you're going to go from the bottom right up to where the first part of the decrease started here at the top of the crown for the first quarter. You can use whatever method you want to use to join your side seams. I would normally use the linking machine for this, but for the past couple of months my linking machine was starting to have tantrums, and in the end it ended up having a full-on meltdown, so it's gone off for repair. So I'm going to be using the normal sewing machine for that, which I'll be doing off camera, and then we'll be using the knitting machine to graft these crown sections together. So that's the side seam joined, and the hat obviously now is in a tubular shape, The next step is to join the first part of the crown here. And to do that, we're going to put this edge on the knitting machine and then this edge together, right sides together. So in order to get a really neat join, you just pull a few needles out and then you go into the very edge of your fully fashioned decrease. So it's quite easily discernible. These are your knit stitches here, and this is the edge where you did your fully fashioned decrease. Because I use the 3-prong transfer tool, it's this distance here, it's this width here. If you use the double prong transfer tool, it would be slightly narrower. So I've already hung a few stitches here, and just to make it easier for you to see, if I pull down slightly, you'll be able to see where we're going to hang the edge on. So you literally go into the very edge stitch there, the very edge of the stitches there, and you hang it on to the needles, and then you go all the way up to the top of where the crown section is. And again, that section there, you don't pull it too tight because obviously you don't want a tight seam, and then you carry on going up. And of course, when you get to the very top of the crown section, you put the transfer tool at the very pivot point there, which would have been one of the last 2 remaining stitches that we cast off. And that gets hooked on to the needles like that. And then you just move these back here, like so. And we're going to do the purl side. So this is the purl side of the fabric, and again obviously we're matching right side to right side, and I've got the transfer tool, the 3-pronged transfer tool, right up against the side seam there, and we're going to put, just as we did with the knit side, the very edge of the section onto the needles, just like that. And then as we go along, you just literally slightly uncurl it, and it's exactly the same as before. If you go right to the very edge, you'll be able to see where you need to put the tool into, and flip it over, and again right across the top like that. And you keep going, and it's quite an easy thing really, all the way along until you get to the very end and you've matched up both edges. So both edges are matched up now. I'm going to bring all the needles forward to holding position. So the carriage is set to knit, and if you bring all the needles to holding position, and actually if you close the latches, it will make it easier for the machine to make its first knit through. And it's set at the loosest tension, and what we're going to do is make 2 passes across. And now we're going to bind off using the latch tool method. Sometimes it's called the loop through loop method. You can just find the latch tool, there we go. And what I'm going to do here is just take the latch tool and bind off like that. Now I prefer to use the latch tool bind off rather than the gate peg bind off. This particular machine doesn't have any gate pegs, so that choice is taken away from me anyway. I find that doing the 2 rows at the loosest tension gives a much far superior finish. Because doing the 1 row at the loosest tension, it tends to bunch up on the right side. But other people will of course disagree, and you may find an easier way to actually join the seam. But grafting this way without a linking machine is the next best method that I find. You may disagree, so you pay your money, you take your choice, it's entirely down to you. So we've got to the very end now. I'm just going to get this last stitch off and pull the yarn through and show you what that looks like. So there is the seam, and here is the first part of the crown. So at this point we've joined the side seam and the first part of the crown there. The next point is to join this section of the crown over here. Again, right sides to right sides, and we're going to put that on the machine just as we did before. So just to recap, the side seam is done, that part of the crown is done, and so is this part. And the loose ends here and here that were on this crown shape here, I wove in and snipped them off, and I'll show you how to do that for these parts. And what we need to do now is bring this section to here and join them in one whole seam. And to do that, you just simply move the crown sections like this and put the edges on the knitting machine. So we're going to go from this section here all the way across to this section, put those on the needles, and then we do the same from here all the way across there. So that's one half of the center crown section on, and now we're going to put the second part on, again right sides to right sides and naturally matching the center seam here. So that's the second side of the crown on. All the needles are into hold position. It makes it easier for the carriage because all it needs to do is just move the needles back as opposed to moving them forward and then back. I've also closed the latches, and what I'm going to do now is to wrap the yarn. All you do, the loose ends of the yarn, all you do is just go under and over, under, over, under, over, and you do that with the loose ends because it actually helps to tie them in. It saves unsightly knots and it's a more secure way. If you don't want to do that, then of course that is entirely down to you. You can just tie them off in the seams if you want to, but I think it makes a neater finish. And again, as before, it's 2 passes with the carriage at tension 10, and then we bind off. So the hat is complete now. I'm just going to take the scissors and cut away these edges that we wove in, and what you can see is that they're nice and evenly secured in, and as I said, it just makes for a much neater finish. Now what I'm going to do is give this a thorough shot of steam, paying particular attention to the crown and the side seam here, and I'll show you what it looks like. And here is the finished hat that I've put on a polystyrene head, which I've nicknamed Beanie. And Beanie was a character in a very popular television series called Crossroads Motel in the 70s and 80s here in the UK. I'm just going to turn this around now so you can see what the crown looks like. And this is the crown of the hat. It's much less visible than what it would be if we cinched it up at the top there. Here are the 4 sections that we joined together using the fully fashioned decrease method. And I think you can agree that it's much neater doing it this way. It might take you a little bit longer, but the results speak for themselves. I have actually timed this between using the every other needle method as opposed to the shaped method, and it just took an extra 15 minutes. And in the grand scheme of things, 15 minutes is not really a very long time at all.